Welcome. I am Nora from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro in the United States. I appreciate your interest in my presentation. Preliminary data from this study was presented at the 2019 Lilac Conference in Nottingham. It is based on work that was done in the spring of 2019. This is my agenda for today. I would like to talk about my motivation and introduce Anne-Marie Lloyd's comprehensive model of information literacy. The second part of the talk will talk about the U.S. context of information literacy and attempts to measure it. I will then talk about critical thinking as part of information literacy, and then talk about this particular study that I did, the questions that I asked, the methods that I use, and the findings. Finally, I will speak about conclusions and further research that I would suggest for the field to move forward. So I was motivated to do this study partially by Anne-Marie Lloyd's 2017 article where she laid out a comprehensive model of information literacy. Her model begins with what she terms information landscapes. I think of libraries as being manicured landscapes of information. They are curated, they are organized, they are tagged, and these landscapes can be contrasted with the internet, which is a much more wild form of information landscape. The second part of her model is that of literacies of information. This has been the place where practicing librarians and those who are responsible for information literacy instruction have resided. We have used the term information literacy, but we know that there are other parts of these literacies of information, including digital literacy, which is, how to use the connecting equipment like a mouse to connect to particular information resources, media literacy, media information literacy, which of course is the UNESCO preferred term. So these literacies of information are informed by where the individuals constructing their particular literacy, what characteristics they have in terms of three different modalities. One is the social modality, where how we have been raised, how we have been educated in school, what do our friends know and how do they share it, epistemic modalities are how we assign authority. Physical modalities are can we perform the actions needed in order to connect to information. That seems to be connected to digital literacy. And those at the center is a person's information environment. And you can see that the concentric circles are open, they're dashed lines, because things move in and out of these concentric circles depending on the situations that are involved. When I started my study, I thought that dispositions might be in the social modalities. But I've really, through this research that I'm going to present here, I have really moved that to this epistemic instrumental modalities. It is in our cognitive abilities that these critical thinking dispositions toward thinking are housed. In recent years in the United States, there have been two sets of descriptions and some would say standards for reaching information literacy. So I was very interested in the educational context and looked at both the Association for College and Research Libraries Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education and the American Association for School Libraries National School Library Standards for learners, school librarians, and school libraries. And you can see even in the language of the titles that the impact of these is quite different. Notice the key features of the ACRL frameworks is 6 different what they call threshold concept frames. Each of those frames has different knowledge practices and dispositions related to them. The only thing that I will say about the ECIL standards is that the dispositions are featured, but they are definitely very differently described than they are in the ACRL. One of my other motivations that I didn't describe earlier is that I'm very, very interested in lifelong learning. So information literacy that's outside of the educational context. So I want these 2 documents to yield information literate adults who can do critical thinking. Both ECIL and ACRL use dispositions as part of their view of information literacy. This paper focuses on the ACRL view. Halpern is the author of a major work in how knowledge is constructed. She lays out 6 major dispositions that are the basis of critical thinking. This chart is an introduction to these, and I have laid those 6 dispositions, starting with willingness to plan, flexibility, etc., next to what I consider to be similar constructions within 2 of the frames of ACRL. The 2 frames that I use here as illustrations are authority is constructed frame and the information has value frame. These are the 2 frames that are used in the tests that I chose to deploy in my particular study. This language, comparing Halpern with what is said in the ACRL frameworks, is not verified by research, but is my own construction of what I think are connections between the two. And I would welcome you to comment, especially on this particular chart, if you, in your questions, and also if you would like to contact me about that. I would also like to study that further. So my research questions were around the dispositions, and they involved a test of information literacy called the Tattle. The Tattle Test was developed by Carrick Enterprises, and had been very recently developed to try and measure information literacy as the ACRL framework described it. And it uses questions and asks for what kinds of behaviors students would use to answer those questions. So I used the Tattle Test to ask whether demographic characteristics, including racial, ethnic identity, gender, generation, or class rank, affected the dispositions measure that was also part of the Tattle Test. Did prior exposure to information literacy instruction affect student performance on the Tattle information literacy scores or on the type of dispositions exhibited? Do dispositions predict information literacy? Methods used in the study were a sample of undergraduates enrolled in a course entitled Information Use in a Digital World. Administration of those Tattle tests, which were developed by Carrick Enterprises. Comparison of an overall information literacy score on 2 different tests with scores on dispositions as measured by the test. 2 tests of overall information literacy based in 2 frames from the ACRL framework. Module 1, which was evaluating process and authority. Module 4, which is the value of information. So based on 2 of the 6 frames that make up the ACRL framework. Each test looked at dispositions. 2 were shared by both the evaluating process and authority test and value of information test. Those were mindful self-reflection and responsibility to community. Only one other one was measured, and that was only in the evaluating process and authority, and that was the toleration of ambiguity. This is a very complicated slide, so I will point you to only the ones highlighted in orange, where the disposition called mindful self-reflection correlated with overall scores in the pre-EPA test and the pre-VOI test. Also, responsibility to community on the pre-EPA and on the pre-VOI were significantly related. So in both tests, responsibility to community were strongly related to each other. So the answers to my research questions: do dispositions measured using the Tattle Test vary across these demographics? No. The dispositions do not seem to be tied to social identities as I use them in this particular study. Did prior exposure to information literacy instruction affect student performance on the Tattle information literacy scores or on the type of dispositions exhibited? No. They're self-reported in prior instruction before they took the tests did not seem to impact dispositions or overall information literacy. Do the dispositions predict information literacy? Yes, there is some relationship, not a straight prediction, but responsibility to community and mindful self-reflection were definitely related to overall information literacy score on the two tests that were given. As Anne-Marie Lloyd wrote in her grand unifying theory of information literacy, unless those who engage in information literacy research can come towards a more holistic understanding of the field, it will remain trapped in an agenda of disjuncture and divergence that fails to evolve. This study shows that indeed dispositions are important to overall information literacy, but using different language to describe similar phenomena will hamper understanding in IL practice, and it will preclude connections with other fields. Dispositions are in the epistemic/instrumental modality part of the Lloyd model. And that is important because it shows that we need to appeal to the cognitive faculties of our students. It is important, even essential, to impact these habits of mind. IL practitioners were right to bring in dispositions as a component of the framework, but there is work to be done to align the two fields of information literacy and dispositions/critical thinking. I have tried here to shed a bit of light on the Lloyd model by studying the role of dispositions. I look forward to your questions, and I look forward to having you read my entire paper. Comments are always encouraged. Thank you very much for your attention.